Did you click my thumbnail? There is nobody to blame but yourself, okay? But since you're here, let's see if I can freestyle woodwork something really cool for you. I'll walk you through the whole woodworking journey from chainsaw milling to finishing. So let's get to it. And if you really enjoy the sound of my monotone voice, amateur cinematography, or general lack of direction with my tangents, drill the like button and subscribe. And if you're really feeling lippy, feel free to leave a comment. Ah yes, it's another beautiful day in El Paso, Texas, and what better day to join somebody who started a woodworking business in the middle of a desert, right? Let's see which slab is calling to me while I pray to not get bit by a snake. How about this one? This was one of my very first recorded chainsaw mills of a pine log, and it was quite a mess. As I struggled to keep up with daylight, the cuts were quite uneven. This slab that I'm using this episode is not from this log, but it was the result of that same amateur life. Okay, so I decided to use this slab. Not too big, not too small, but definitely transitioning to larger projects slowly but surely. I was definitely moving in the direction of a small coffee table, so I set the slab and walnut next to each other for some inspiration. My style is slowly evolving into mulberry live edges coupled with walnut to contrast the color scheme. I think it is original and adds a sense of intentionality and a modern effect to my work. I cannot count how many times my chainsaw mill has encountered screws, nails, and even metal rods. I'm really considering getting a metal detector to detect these little mischievous surprises. Woodworking is like anything else. It's all war with moments of peace, but I suppose the struggle to create something great in turn makes us better too. All right, let's not get too deep. We're not even 2 minutes into this thing. If this is your first time watching and you're asking yourself, is this guy gonna teach me anything at all? It's because the channel is not so much a how-to channel, but simply entertainment. However, I have had some requests for some details on CNC particularly, so I may start a Marini Furniture Technicals channel soon, so stand by for that. If you cannot sit still for longer than 24 seconds, I do have a channel called Marini Furniture Shorts with various short videos geared towards small projects. Either which way, I am happy to have you tune in. Planing discipline has evolved into the foundation of most of my woodwork. At this point, I'm not so much thinking about what I'm going to make as opposed to how perfectly flat I can make this thing. I watch a lot of Japanese woodworkers on YouTube and I cannot help but appreciate their attention to detail. I saw an episode where this carpenter planed a beautiful live edge desktop, let it sit for a week, and then repeated the process again. He said he wanted to see how the slab reacted. As woodworkers, something a lot of us learn the hard way is moisture content level, but I have worked with wood within its ideal moisture content level before and still seen movement. It can be extremely frustrating because it simply isn't fair, but in general, neither is life. Oh no, I'm doing it again. Anyways, I did not have a week to let this thing go through a mood swing, but I did check it with my level each day as I worked on it throughout the week. She was indeed a unicorn, and you all know what I'm talking about. My router sled did some great work on this, however. I do have a critique for myself and a tip for you all on this segment. When using the router sled, I suggest planing the underside of your slab prior to the surface side. This will maximize the surface area of your project, but easier said than done. In this case, I wanted to ensure I maintained at least 2 inches in thickness to prevent any rapid movement. As I said before, I'm finally feeling comfortable enough to start pushing into larger projects. And as I'm freestyling with this, I was leaning more towards a coffee table. I did not have a lot of walnut left in my garage, so I knew I was going to have to work efficiently with the material I had. However, as I was looking at the walnut after dimensioning, I was beginning to have doubts that this was going to be a coffee table. I guess you could say I was starting to experience some cold feet with that direction and admittedly started to think of other ideas. Regardless of the doubts I was experiencing, I did decide whether it was a coffee table or not. I did not want the support system to be thinner than an inch. So I committed to gluing the walnut together to add some girth. Whatever direction I choose to go with this thing, it will have sturdier support and simply look better. Freestyling has its blessings and curses. The blessing is there is no structure to what you're doing, which is quite liberating. This is great because most of us suffer from some degree of ADHD and prefer to be our own bosses, right? The curses, well, you can work your way into a corner that you cannot work your way out of. In this case, it was beginning to feel like a corner. I set out to create a larger project. However, the outcome was starting to resemble a project that was only getting smaller. So as I explored room to room, it finally came to me. I've really wanted to start making some heirlooms for my son, and I figured a coat rack for him would be perfect. It could double as a convenient surface, is at least what I'm going to call it, to place our keys or whatever while we're opening and closing the door. Men and women tend to have completely different tastes when it comes to furniture. My wife does not like the natural look of things. She prefers something perfectly round or perfectly straight. Boring! I, on the other hand, prefer the natural look of things. I like the live edges, I like the pockets, and the unique little details, at least to a certain extent. There is a balance between the order and chaos of things that make it work. However, I guess it's all subjective. I'm not really in an epoxy phase yet. I'm still somewhat in, I guess, what you would call a natural state, and I want to leave these little details in of what many would consider blemishes. They simply look really cool to me, so let's keep them in and just explain to my wife, in very confusing woodworking tongue, why they can't be removed. What's the harm in that? Most of us come to a point in our lives when we transition from youth to adults, and we have this moment where we ask ourselves, I'm such a loser, what am I going to do with my life? No? Was that just me? Okay, moving on. This piece of furniture has finally come to that point where we had a general idea of being a floating shelf / coat rack, but now we really have to sit down and do the dirty work. Make the sketches, make the measurements, brainstorm the CNC configurations. I guess you could say this piece transitioned from its ketchup-stained tuxedo t-shirt days to its suit and tie phase. It was time to grow up. But the fun is not over, it's just different, simply within left and right lateral limits. This will help prevent us from backing into another corner that we cannot recover from in this endeavor. So now that a lot of the design legwork has been completed, we start working on the brackets, or what we previously thought were coffee table legs. The way I designed these was based on an isosceles right triangle, which is a 90-degree triangle with two equal sides. Nerd! The reason being is that I want the support system to be well fortified, as kids tend to be a little unpredictable. And by unpredictable, I mean that in some point in time, they're going to hang on this thing like it's a monkey bar. So I want to make sure that this thing is not in the least bit flimsy, but well secured and well designed with a validated support system. To do that, I'm going to have to use some good glue supplemented with screws, preferably with some aesthetic. CNC is not necessarily highly technical, but it is technical, technically speaking. I'm not at the source, okay? So to get you up to speed, the direction we are going to go with this project is recessing the brackets and the fascia to add extra security to the support system. Additionally, the fascia just wouldn't look right if it wasn't recessed, as there would be a gap between the top of the fascia and the bottom of the live edge. Before we begin, we have to confirm the measurements are nearly exact and preferably within the 0.01 inch range for error, as the goal here is security. I have had my bouts with CNC, but over time, one of the biggest tips I can give is, at minimum, double check everything. The last thing I can afford at this point is making an enormous error with a measurement and backing myself into what we've been referring to as a corner. So we do our dry runs digitally and mechanically to make sure this doesn't turn into some extreme piece of modern art. Let's get out of the garage for a minute and enjoy some of that fresh air. Let's take a breather. Let's face it, the garage is our sanctuary, right? We can stay in there all day, but I find I start to make little mistakes when I'm fatigued, and sometimes I realize I've been in the garage all day without eating or taking any breaks. So let's go for a cruise and brainstorm some finishing ideas at the hardware store. Like I said previously, I feel like my work is gravitating towards mulberry as I can harvest this myself, supplemented with walnut. But I feel like I'm missing something, and I can't believe I'm saying it, but I want to add some metal. My take on modern furniture is that gold is making a subtle comeback. And when I envision it in my head with this project, I think it'll be a good addition. On another note, the great thing about woodworking is you end up producing some scraps for firewood. And I want to be intentional with the time I have with my son. So let's roast some marshmallows. As we transition to CNC execution, I do some additional prep work. We make sure the machine is nice and clean to ensure we do not disrupt any parallels and there's no dust buildup on the rails. I put some dowels in place so that the fascia stays nice and snug. There are times when the piece I was working on was not securely fastened and either the router jumped or the end product came out quite sloppy. Moving on, the CNCs can make some incredible carvings, and call me a cheater, but sometimes it's okay to work smarter, not harder. The irony is, over time, I've actually ended up using the machine for functional purposes just as much as carving purposes. It was such a great investment, and it's a great skill to have. This was probably the third time I checked my measurements at this point to ensure I'm getting as close as I can to that 0.01 inch error margin. My CNC has its limitations, and one of those limitations is its Z-axis. So one of the ways I get around this is by using shorter bits. Now you have to be careful with how short you go, because if you have programmed to cut deeper than the exposure of the bit on the router, well, something catastrophic will happen to your project, CNC, or both. In this case, I measured the exposure of the end mill against the depth of the pocket I had programmed to ensure we were good to go. Easy day. So after that speech about accuracy, guess what happened? I came up short. I came up short by about 1/8 of an inch on the length of the bracket, so I'm going to have to improvise. I don't want that gap between the bracket and the fascia because I want that added support. So I'm going to have to do what I think us Americans do best. Improvise as we go. The funny thing I learned when I was active duty is a lot of our opponents throughout the years would study our dogma tactics, but would find out ultimately we just ended up winging it. We simply polished up the nomenclature with now what we refer to as maneuver warfare. It's a hilarious story. So I guess we've transitioned from freestyle woodworking to maneuver woodworking. Either way, we will find a way or make one. You can kind of see here in a moment on the bottom of the live slab, there's some holes which I had to drown out with pure tung oil. I really did not want to dispose of the entire slab because, well, it was too beautiful. So one of the cool effects of pure tung oil is it operates as an insecticide. Another interesting fact I've learned over the years is if you heat up the pure tung oil, it decreases its viscosity. Nerd, nerd, nerd! In doing so, it will penetrate deeper into the wood, which is good for a lot of different protective reasons. I will try to capture this in one of my next episodes, or maybe I'll make a short out of it. Although not perfect, overall I am happy with the outcome of the bracket assembly in the CNC pocket configuration. This was one of my finer executions and to my surprise is coming together quite nicely. So we start to assemble it together with glue, dowels, and these fancier gold screws. I had a little issue with the gold screws as they were a little softer than I expected. So I purchased a tap and drill set. That worked incredibly well. It laid in the threads, which made it easier to get those screws in place without damaging the heads. So the screws for the most part are there to add that extra security for the support system to prevent this from becoming a total catastrophe. Fortunately, because I was able to find them in gold, the limited areas they may have visual exposure won't be too distracting or, well, tacky. And to shore up this encroaching gold theme in my work, I decided to go with these gold handles to be used for the coat hangers. So we measure up the placements so that they are symmetrical and sensical with the direction of this project. In truth, it seems like mistakes happen regardless of how careful you are. Not to discourage you from that endeavor, somehow, some way, I ended up with various stray areas of dried glue on the project. So I make sure to be extremely cautious with my chisels as I perform this with surgical precision, at least from my perspective. The recording says otherwise. After my confidence was shook, I extensively searched for other blemishes. A few dents were sanded out, some inaccuracies were hand planed out to create a flush surface, and those sharp corners were softened up with some 400 grit. All of this effort is to improve the quality of the surface for our finishing segment and overall outcome. Those little details can make all the difference. Before I finish, I like to give my project a nice and detailed vacuum effort. I will wipe down the wood too, but without the vacuum, those little pockets filled with dust are kind of trapped in there. And when I apply the finish, it kind of clumps up on me and I end up spreading this mess of dust and finish all over the place. It just becomes a mess. So I've really had to discipline myself with some patience to give it a deep vacuum come the final steps of my projects. Once that benchmark has been reached, we advance with pure tung oil. I'll lay out some clean paper for a clean surface and get to it. Because there isn't too much UV exposure in the winter, we will have to allow the pure tung oil to polymerize over the course of the next month, indoors. So we will have to keep it dry in the meantime. And look at that, the tung is applied and the true character of this project starts to reveal itself. Finishing really adds that rich color to the wood while protecting it from various encounters. We are so impossibly close. We are almost there. So I carefully measure the placement of my drill bit to ensure that it lines up with the stud of the wall I'm going to hang this on. Again, my concern is security, and this absolutely must not go wrong. So I do my checks before execution. Once I feel comfortable, we act and progressively use larger bits because I do not want to split the wood or cause any cosmetic damage. I support the rear with a hard wood and clamp it in place for added protection. And before the big reveal, if you have enjoyed the debauchery, drill that like and subscribe for me. And whether you love it or hate it, leave a comment as it all works to my advantage. Lastly, we verify with our level that we are indeed level. And as the voice generators would say, Viola. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the result of my freestyle project, which ultimately evolved into a duo floating shelf and coat hanger for my kids. I was very happy with the outcome of the support system, the live edge, and the project as a whole. The rounded edges on the support system and the fascia really added some sophistication and intentionality to the project and will likely be included into my signature style as it continues to unfold. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you for the next episode out on the 1st of every month.